I've had people, even if they've been on insulin for 20 years, get off the insulin in as little as 8 weeks. The weight loss happens about 1 to 2 pounds per week. My philosophy is to get it to work the first time, every time.
Eric, for somebody tuning in right now, saying to themselves, I've tried all the diets, I've tried all the different lifestyle modifications, and I've been stuck carrying this extra weight for the majority of my life. And I feel like this is just who I am, and I'm hopeless beyond, just kind of maintaining where I'm at or having small ebbs and flows when it comes to weight loss and weight gain. What would you say to them?
Well, you're describing just about everyone who comes to me in my office at Duke. Everyone says I've tried everything, and then I have a form where you fill in everything you've tried, and well, no, you really haven't tried everything, but medical weight loss is what I'm trained in. Obesity medicine is the subspecialty. I'm an internist, internal medicine first, then obesity medicine specialist. I'm not a surgeon for weight loss. People come to me primarily metabolic changes like diabetes and weight management, weight loss. And I basically ask people to tell me their story, and I get the feedback that no other doctor really took more than a millisecond to listen to someone's story. And actually, I'll listen very carefully and have someone realize that they haven't tried everything. It may seem like you've tried everything, and then as I get into it and people start looking at the wall chart that I have of foods, and they're categorized basically by carbs. The super high ones, super high carb foods are all in a little red box at the bottom, to avoid these. They look up and they go, I did do the Atkins diet once, and, it worked really well. And, okay. So what I do is very similar to what the Atkins diet is. And, so I guess the first thing I do is listen and then give hope. Because I've had people come to me who they've had diabetes for 20 years on insulin. And just a simple thing like changing the food, and you do have to be very strict about it if you're going to try to fix diabetes, can be very powerful. So I say, maybe you haven't tried this. And if it's the first visit to me, I'll even say, well, you haven't tried it with me. And so, it seems like everyone is searching and trying to find the one simple answer. And that answer actually has been around 150 years, and that's to cut the carbs out. It's focusing on sugar as the culprit, not fat or calories. That gets too confusing, but there's a lot of ways to be healthy. And if someone's ending up in the Duke Keto Medicine Clinic, which I call it now, they've usually tried just about everything, or they feel like they have. And I like to start with lifestyle because it's very potent, and most people can wrap their head around it and do it if they know the detail, to be strict about it. Your body starts burning its own fat, and that's a wonderful thing. Feels great.
Well, that sounds like a great thing, especially for somebody who has lost a lot of that hope and they've been carrying extra weight for a lot of years. We know carbs is a big piece of this, but let's start with somebody coming to your office. You gave that example, diabetes, 20 years. What is the first step?
As of the last 2 years, I'm now treating and helping, teaching people over the internet more than I am in my office. And this is fascinating because it is so robust. It works so well if you teach it in a certain way. People don't even have to come see me or see a physician unless you're on medicine. So I've kind of learned the safe use, the guardrails, if you will, of how to use a very potent lifestyle method. And the first thing to do is develop rapport. If someone comes to me, they're on 10 different medicines, usually from 3 different doctors. And I'm going to be the one to come in and say, you can stop all the... No, it's a process. I need to first develop rapport. Now, it's fascinating. Some people come to me, they've already watched every YouTube video I ever did, and they some of them know the name of my firstborn child, and others have no idea. And the others are referred by the orthopedic surgeon because they need to have a knee replacement or a hip replacement and they're too heavy. Or the heart surgeons actually send me people who are too heavy for a heart transplant. So, but even then they might not be motivated enough to wrap their head around stopping, sweet tea. That's a delicacy. No, it's a staple in the Southern United States. If you ask for tea, you get sugar tea, you get sweet tea. So you have to ask for unsweet tea in the Southern United States. But so developing rapport, getting an idea of the medical issues going on, if you're on medication and have medical issues, it requires the knowledge of someone trained in this, because I can take people off medicines very quickly, and you have to be careful. Now, let's say if you're not clinically ill, you're not on medicines, all this, gosh, it really is just as simple as cutting down the carbs. And the degree to which you need to cut them down depends on your metabolism, depends on your age, depends on your activity level. And it kind of, the low-carb world kind of selects out 3 different categories. So if you're young, healthy, active, you're a biker and you're, running marathons, you can have more carbs than if you're, you've hurt your knee and you can't exercise at all, and or somewhere in between there. So there are different carb levels, I think. But as a place to start, if someone ends up in an office or wanting to take one of our courses to learn how to do it, my philosophy is to get it to work the first time, every time. And so I teach people the strictest version of it so that I know that their body will become a fat-burning body and they'll start changing the metabolism in a very, very safe and quick way. If imagine you went to a doctor and you had a infection, sinusitis, and the doctor said, well, this is a difficult pill to swallow, and it's very expensive, and it's hard to do, but here, take this pill. No, and it might work. No, what I do is teach, here you follow this list of foods. It's been studied so much, it would be approved as a prescription drug if there were a process to approve diets, but there aren't. So that's why I use a very strict version of a low-carb keto diet when, often people have selected themselves out. They know what they're getting into. Other times people have no idea, and I just kind of explain how our bodies work. A doctor means teacher. So really all I'm doing is teaching as a doctor how our body works.
To keep that hope piece going early on in the conversation, for that person, again, coming back to our example, who is on medications, they're type 2 diabetic, and it's been a lot of years, meaning their pancreas has been pumping out so much insulin trying to regulate blood sugar, and it's been overworked for a period of time. Is there still hope for that person, or is there a point of no return if you've pushed it beyond a certain point?
Oh, well, so there's always hope. And it's fascinating. The nuance to what you're saying is if you give insulin, actually, if you give a hormone to the body, generally speaking, what the body does in response is to suppress its own hormone secretion. So it's very possible that the long-term people getting insulin, the pancreas is kind of getting lazy and sluggish and not running out of insulin. And that's one of these common things I hear today. The endocrinologists, straight endocrinologists, are saying, "Oh, you've run out of insulin and you need it." And that you can even read that as what diabetes is. Type 2 diabetes is your body's it's run out of insulin. No, the insulin's already high, like you're saying. It's pumping it out, and you actually reach this kind of a point where it stops working, and so you escalate the insulin higher. I had someone on 600 units of insulin a day and got her off in 8 weeks. 600, so if the usual dilution isn't enough, they go to the double strength dilution. If that isn't enough, there's a triple strength. And it's like you just keep going up. So yeah, I've had people, even if they've been on insulin for 20 years, get off the insulin in as little as 8 weeks. And sure, I suppose if you treated 100 people and they'd have diabetes for 20 years, maybe 10% wouldn't get off insulin, but just about everyone does. Right? So, and we can actually measure whether your body is making insulin, not by measuring insulin, because if you're injecting it, your blood level will be the injected insulin as well, but by measuring the insulin precursor called C-peptide, and that gives you a measure of whether your body is making its own insulin at all. Sometimes I've had people be told their body isn't making insulin, and we measure a C-peptide, and it certainly is. So there are these shortcuts that doctors take, and even then unwittingly perpetuate the problem. I mean, if you have type 2 diabetes, your insulin's already high. You don't want to go on insulin. That's just going to make you gain more weight and you'll always have diabetes. Oh, well, wait, that's what the doctors say. You're always going to have diabetes because you're on insulin. It locks you into this gaining weight and having insulin resistance. And so now, fortunately, the diabetes world, and remember, I'm an obesity medicine doctor, not a diabetologist. We have different training. They're bumbling upon medicines. Well, that's not a good term. They've discovered medicines that actually make you lose weight while you're treating the diabetes. And that's the kind of medicine that you want to get on. If you've been taught, if you're obese and if you're heavy, you have type 2 diabetes, don't go on a medicine that lowers the blood sugar and makes you gain weight. Go on a medicine that lowers the blood sugar and makes you lose weight at the same time. And then, it's going to jumpstart you to that weight loss and diabetes fixing. But I can accomplish so much by just changing the food. I don't use these medicines that are now being used to lower blood sugar and have you lose weight. I suppose I could if asked. I might, but the diet itself is so powerful. But insulin, to inject insulin, if you're type 1, you need it. Saves lives. But the type 2s on insulin will really never get better. And you hear that language, will manage your diabetes, right? On these ads on TV, manage your diet. No, we want to reverse it. We want to fix it. And it is reversible, fixable in just about every case. At a recent meeting, I met a couple of young doctors from Malaysia. And they came up to me and, oh, Dr. Westman, great to meet you. We're doing what you're doing on the internet and basically taking people off diabetes medicines. And I asked, well, how do you make sure it's safe? Well, we give people continuous glucose monitors. And as their blood sugars come down, we take people off their medicine. And I said, well, how do you know to do that? I said, well, we'd rather have it a little high, a little lower. How did you learn that? I asked. We watched your video, Dr. Westman. So the information gets out in very interesting ways. And I said, how many of what percent of your type 2s on insulin get off insulin? And they looked at each other very quickly. Everyone. So this was demonstrated in a clinical trial by Virta Health and published in peer-reviewed papers that they quote 70% of folks got off insulin within the 1 to 2 years they were having people do it. But so clinical trials actually, in my experience, are not as powerful as having a doctor be able to. I mean, I can do things that I couldn't do in clinical studies because our protocols were constrained. And so I can find I do even better than what our study showed, because I can talk about the son with whatever problem or the husband or use all of my doctor techniques to support people as well, which in a clinical trial we're much less enthusiastic and less of a cheerleader. It's more we want to see how the diet does, but in a clinic I can be part cheerleader, part coach, part doctor, all at the same time, psychologist, supportive therapist during COVID times. But what you can do with diabetes is really amazing to reverse it, fix it, or reversal is kind of the term, because once you start talking about curing something, it raises hackles about quackery. And this is not quackery, it's science.
Well, at the root of what we're going to be talking about today is a detriment to metabolic health, which at the root of that is insulin and insulin resistance. So I think it'd be helpful here up front in our conversation to talk about, as somebody is gaining weight, and I'll caveat, somebody doesn't necessarily have to be gaining weight for this to happen, and we'll talk about that after. But as somebody starts gaining weight, we'll use that as our example, and their body starts revving up the amount of insulin it's making to control the blood glucose. So basically, early stages when metabolic health starts to decline into more advanced stages. Let's talk about the insulin piece.
Yeah. So the better test to find out what's going on early in this process is the insulin, not the glucose. So you might have a normal glucose level at the expense of a very high insulin level. So the way I kind of put it together, the body doesn't like the glucose to be elevated. I mean, it's not a healthy thing. Over a period of years, if the blood glucose is elevated, you get blindness, kidney failure, amputations. I mean, this is what diabetes is and what diabetes does. So the body sends out, it wants blood glucose to be really well regulated, sends out insulin to keep it regulated, and that can go on for years. And even before you're told you have pre-diabetes, you may have this elevated insulin level. And if you didn't have a formal test where you consumed some carbs and then watch what the insulin did over time, you would never know. But gaining weight is one marker of that. Having a high triglyceride to HDL ratio in the blood is another marker of that. Those are things that are typically measured today. Insulin is not easy to measure, and most doctors don't do it unless you ask them. Now you can get labs done and without doctor's orders, and you can just go to a lab or have them ordered, and you have to pay out of pocket, of course. So insurance won't cover it. But the harsh reality is that pre-diabetes, there's like pre-diabetes where you're maybe 10 to 20 years before full-blown diabetes happens. And that's kind of a theme in metabolic illness, that even things like Alzheimer's, once you have a symptom, it's been about a 20-year process that's been going on. And so what we can do to stop that from happening is when you see your body going down that path, whether it be an elevated blood glucose or insulin or extra fat weight on your body, higher triglyceride, HDL ratio, you want to start making changes. You might, and don't get me wrong, not everyone needs a keto level carb restriction, but sugar is the thing to be careful about, not fat in the food. And it's a tough consensus to bring about to change, but the scientists have all made that flip. In consensus papers of scientists, they basically say it's not fat. It's not saturated fat. That's the problem. That research, though, is a tough time getting through, penetrating other organizations that have vested interests in that message or other elements of that. So, yeah, I mean, you can just assume that diet will be controversial forever. You find something that works for you and get things that are measurable in terms of health and stick with it. And follow, now with YouTube, it's fantastic. You can follow influencers, wake up every day. How are you doing? They're still here. The internet has allowed people to band together in groups that has actually now changed medical science. And that's a phenomenon. Again, it's kind of sad, but what people are doing in their own lives is way ahead of the medical mainstream. I mean, it's like they're still using phones with cords, and we're using flip phones. I mean, smartphones. It's funny how new technology, when it comes to nutrition and medical, is not adopted by the mainstream. Well, okay. Maybe because they're not making money from it. That's the obvious. The pharma influence in the medical training and teaching is really strong. And we don't get much training about nutrition as doctors, sadly.
You mentioned the fact that insulin resistance can build up over 10 or 20 years, which I think is why this insulin resistance is such a scary thing and destroying so many people's health, because again, it takes so long for symptoms to start appearing sometimes. So the way I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what's happening is people are having too much sugar, too much carbohydrates in the diet. Sugar builds up in the body, and then what the body tries to do is to shovel that into cells in the body using insulin. And over time, it needs more and more insulin. So it starts making more insulin, leading to insulin resistance. The body's resisting allowing that insulin to move glucose into the cells. So it keeps making more, just trying to ram through. And in the background, you're building up your insulin over this 10 or 20 year period of time. And you mentioned the blood glucose causing certain health issues. The insulin being high and people not knowing it is causing different issues at the same time.
Yeah. So the best marker of the health consequences is the multiplication of the glucose times the insulin itself. So that if your insulin's high but your glucose is normal, there's a problem. There's a health-related issue. And it's interesting because the more this is understood, the more complicated it gets. Of course, not all tissues get insulin resistant. And then over time, while it seems irreversible, I've seen things reverse that where other people said it couldn't reverse. So there's always hope with this, and then of course the nuance is some people can tolerate more carbs than others, and that's it's not fair. Even within the same family, one of my brothers, he was the natural athlete, played college basketball and semi-pro, and I was studying for the medical MCATs, so we kind of selected out, and that's kind of generally true. If you were athletic naturally and you had athletics and sports keep you healthy for the first half of your life, then age may catch up with you. And of course, most people can't keep up that level of athleticism. And so you're having to ask the diet to do a little more than the exercise component of your health equation. But I'm optimistic and hopeful that to at least give it a try. I mean, worst case is we improve someone's diet, they get to eat great healthy foods, and worst case is that things just get better, they don't get entirely reversed. But it's an exciting time, and I'm such a believer in nutrition as the key. My field has just kind of gone off internal medicine into medication care. It's really pretty depressing.
You say nutrition's the key. Part of your message in your book is the fact that in the beginning, you like to simplify things for people and just have them start with diet. Because there's, of course, so many different variables to a healthy lifestyle, and diet is one of them. But there's stress management, connection with other people, exercise. We could go on and on. But I think this makes it a lot more accessible for people. And you mentioned in the book, this is the biggest needle mover. So people are going to start to see things working better when they just focus on the diet in the beginning. So let's talk about what that looks like. We know carbs, again, is what we're focusing in on when it comes to diet. But for somebody that wants to start to make the changes and start to fix their metabolism, let's get into what the nuances of that look like.
Yeah, well, and the mindset change is really important. I try to work on that right at the beginning, that you don't have to exercise to lose weight or to improve your health. So many people come in with that. In fact, I've had people say, well, I know you have to exercise to lose weight, so I didn't even try because my knee hurts so bad I can't exercise. I'm like, no, wait a sec. So I'll use things like people come to me in wheelchairs and they lose weight. And I was on a podcast with another doctor who does this, and he says, oh yeah, I had people paraplegic come to me. You couldn't move either arms or legs. Anyway, so we all one-upped each other. It is all about the food, and it can be that simple. Meeting people where they are in a clinic means I don't throw all of the special or things that we think everything that needs to be done for full health. And starting with food is so powerful. And then when you use a keto diet, the secret is that the hunger goes away after a day or two. just a day or two. And in fact, in some people, it's just the first morning. The first morning you go without carbs, your body starts burning fat. I've had people tell me that first morning, I'd never felt the lack of hunger. So it can be that quick. And that's because your body starts to burn its own fat. Every human becomes a fat burner if you don't eat anything for 2 days. I mean, I woke up after 20 years of kind of living in this space as a internal medicine trained, glucose-centric, carb-centric human and doctor American. Woke up this year after 20 years and finally said, oh my goodness, every human becomes a fat burner if they don't eat for 2 days. I think it's probably because I've been watching these reality shows where people go out and do these incredibly onerous things, but they don't eat anything. So that basically they are fasting or starving. Now, I don't want you to do that, but it turns out that the human body, we store fat for fuel. And if you don't eat anything for a couple of days, you're going to start burning that fuel you have, which is fat. So everyone becomes a fat burner. And that really, so if you get everything out of the way, you become a fat burner. So just don't eat something that stops the fat burning is how I'm trying to teach it now. And that's like, you have to understand there's a carb furnace and a fat furnace. And if you eat a carb, you can't burn fat at the same time. So you have this kind of conflict. So basically people come to, in a half hour of me sort of planting these seeds, people go, oh, then all I need to do, I just don't eat carbs and I'll be a fat burner. Yes. So I try to get people to come to that conclusion on their own around whatever barrier there was. Like, but then I need to exercise then. No, you don't. You just don't add in anything that stops the fat burning. And then you have to understand that basic nutrition starts with protein. So we're made of protein, we're made of amino acids. So let's start with meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish, and eggs as your base nutrition, and then you can add in some other things. And I've learned now that having this all on a wall chart or on one piece of paper, so you can see the whole plan, is part of what makes this so effective. I didn't make that up. I borrowed this from doctors who'd used it in the in 1970 to 2000, and so all of the information is on just one sheet of paper. And I think part of the success of what we do is the simplicity in how it's taught, so that people come back saying, well, and then all you need is that one day of the hunger being gone, and then people start going, oh, maybe he's right, but really it's a matter of focusing on eating protein. If you eat animal sources of protein, the fat will come with the protein, so you don't have to worry about adding fats. And that's a big internet keto distraction. It can stop people. So for that person who came in saying they tried everything, and I'll ask, did you try, internet keto? Or if you tried keto before, who taught you? It's usually, well, my coworker, my, Dr. Google. And I'm like, well, okay, that doesn't count. There are a lot of distractions on the internet. And, did you know your body makes its own ketones without you drinking oils? And oh no. So the method we use is based in real food, keeping the carbs under 20 total, not net, per day. And the results are so fast, so that the weight loss happens about 1 to 2 pounds per week. So that's a nice clip. People see or feel the change fast. And then I'm not shy about saying, you have to be strict. This is a pill you need to take every day. Well, and would you go, if a doctor said you need to take this pill 4 times a day for 2 weeks, would you go in and say, well, doc, can I only take it 3 times a day? Or can I take it for 7 days? It's like pills and diets. Suddenly we have this loss of our minds. The food, good food is medicine. And eating this all day long is really important to get those kinds of results. And so often, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I can correct even people who say, I tried keto, it didn't work. I said, well, I'll it's hard for me to go back and figure out what happened. That's the other thing. I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to troubleshoot about what, that's water under the bridge. Who knows what people were doing, and they might not even tell me or remember everything. So I'll just start from here. Let's go forward, and it's all on just one sheet of paper.
Just to make sure I understand that internet keto piece, I think there's a couple parts to that you've talked about. One being online, people talk about limiting protein, and for you, that's not part of the diet. And you also mentioned the piece there of adding oils like MCT oil in, and you do talk about that in your book, but you're saying now that's not essential.
What I teach is what we studied and published papers about, going back to the year 2002 was our first paper, and we published papers on different medical issues like diabetes, fatty liver, PCOS through the years, not just diabetes and obesity. And back then, I mean, there were no apps. There was no bulletproof coffee. There was really no awareness of medium chain triglyceride. So we studied and used a keto diet based with real food. The language today, and then basically it's like Atkins induction or South Beach first phase, or end your carb confusion. Phase 1 is what we call it in the book now. But so I started studying and using this in my clinic, and people started coming in, about 2015 or so, saying, "Well, I really don't like that bulletproof coffee because it gives me stomach upset and it's so expensive." I'm like, "What's that?" I mean, I had no idea. I mean, so there was all of this new keto stuff that kind of cropped up that hadn't, really, I don't know of any study that has looked at adding ketones and oils to a program like this to see what happens to weight loss. All I hear is that it makes people have stomach upset, or they get, it's expensive. And even there was one fellow who was drinking so much apple cider vinegar, he didn't eat any food. And I was like, "What's that? What's apple cider vinegar?" He said, "Well, you don't know? That's keto." I said, "Well, I don't think that's the keto I know." So yeah, internet keto has all of these different products and pills and ideas that, I still haven't been in an infrared sauna and a ice bath, combo. So all these other paleo things got glommed into keto, and the seizure treatment where you have to watch macros really carefully. And we never tell people to watch macros. I mean, again, what we came up with, or what we studied, was formulated and created before there were apps to worry about macros. So if it seems difficult for you to do a keto diet, try a version that's not so difficult. I suppose it would be like, the difference between flying an airplane, which I've never flown one, but it looks pretty complicated, to just hopping in a car and you turn it on and you go. So you want to try a transportation that's simple, or a version of keto that's relatively easier.
I remember years ago when I first started learning about the keto diet and talking to people on the show about it, that protein thing that we talked about isn't part of your diet, watching your protein. That was definitely talked about time and time again, and it made it so confusing because it seemed like this continuum where you could be somewhere in the middle with your protein, but you couldn't push it too far or it would kick you out of ketosis. Highlighting your diet here, the simplicity, we're talking about 20 grams of carbs, and that's total, not net, and you don't have to worry about how much protein is part of that mix. Anything else you want to add to that?
Some clinical programs use 30 as the target, and I think there's a balance so that some people can eat a little more carbs and do fine. But if someone wants to have it work the first time, every time, I would use the 20-gram rule, because then total, not net, because then, so you have to burn through all these carbs before your body's going to give up any of its own fat. And so you want to minimize that distraction from fat burning. And then we do allow for zero carb things. Again, meeting people where they are. We have so many people who are sugar and ultra processed food addicts. if I didn't have artificial or non-sugar sweeteners to tantalize people away from sugar, I would not have nearly the amount of success that I do. So I let people have sugar-free Jell-O at first. And then some people go, oh my goodness, it's so processed and all those additives. I'm like, well, it's not as bad as sugar. And I see it as sort of a temporary thing. Although, as a lifestyle, I might have a artificially sweetened sparkling water or a Diet Coke or soda or whatever. I don't really like Coke. It's more, Dr. Pepper or Mountain Dew. And someone says to me, well, I don't like that one. Well, no, all that matters is you look at the carbs, make sure there's zero. Metabolically, so this could even be a McDonald's burger or Burger King burger, Wendy's burger, I don't care which brand, but they could be part of the solution, actually. I had a young man eat 2 to 3 double cheeseburgers, no bun, no fries, no sugar in the drinks, and he lost 100 pounds or thereabouts. And I've actually tried to track. I can't get my finger on his chart, sadly, but let's say he lost a lot of weight, and I don't ask people to monitor what they do at home. If you want to, you can. But when they come back, I'll have them fill in a little form. What are you eating for breakfast, lunch, dinner? And he basically wrote McDonald's. And I'm like, wait a sec, what? Yeah, I didn't tell him not to eat at McDonald's. I mean, I said just don't have the bun and no fries, that sort of thing. And so it basically worked out. He ate once or twice a day, eating the burgers themselves with diet soda. And metabolically that works because you're keeping the glucose super low, keeping the insulin super low, and all these other worries about the oils and the fats and the processed food, at least in the short run, doesn't make much difference. So I don't really stress about the food quality. We ask people to get the highest quality food they can afford and have access to. In Durham, North Carolina, where I live, if I didn't have a way to have people go to all types of grocery stores, all types of fast food and restaurants, this is how people live. And if I said you had to go to the farmer's market or get half a cow with a friend where it was raised, I mean, that'd be a deal breaker. I mean, I'd have everyone on medicine, and they'd still be eating the McDonald's on medicine, So there are these trade-offs that a lot of consider the source of information. If someone's trying to give you the perfect diet on earth, this is the perfect diet, then they're not going to include those things, whether they need to have that omission or not. It just sounds better, right? It sounds healthier if you don't eat at McDonald's or fast food places, but whether there's a clinical trial proving that or not, well, they don't have to do one. They're the guru influencer who, really they don't have to show evidence of what they're saying is better than anyone else or, is the best. I would rather have breadth, flexibility in my teaching to accommodate more people, especially in a clinical setting. If someone already has all these medical issues, you want to make it as simple as possible.
So what I hear you saying is when it comes to the weight loss piece, at least, quality of food doesn't matter. It comes back to the carbs. And in this case, if you're in phase 1, the 20 total carbs a day. And I want to highlight something you talked about before to make sure people understand this, because it's such a key concept why you're telling people they have to watch the carbs. It comes back to the insulin piece. So when you have sugar or carbs, you're going to spike insulin in your body. And you touched on this, but again, I really want to hammer it home that when insulin gets spiked, it is locking up fat burning in your body. So you're not going to be able to release all that extra weight you're trying to lose or release when you spike insulin.
Yeah, so you drink sugar, blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, turns off the fat burning. So you can't really burn fat when you're drinking sugar. I mean, and there's a great paper about this, but the title of the paper turns off so many people. The title says something like overfeeding of high-carb diets leads to all of these terrible things, fatty liver and all that. Well, overfeeding actually is what normal consumption is today. It's just the paper was done so long ago, it was assumed that 25 100 calories a day was overfeeding, when that's what most Americans are eating today. So you have to always look through the title of something and get to the actual detail of it. But the fat burning as a default, and it's almost like a safe mode on a computer, really. If you had low energy on a computer, it doesn't go into this toxic state that's going to self-destruct, right? I mean, the computer, it goes into a safe mode where I don't really understand exactly, but it uses less energy, I guess. Hey, wait, that's what happens on a keto diet. When you're fat burning, you're actually changing your metabolism to conserve things a little more. And that insulin component is really important. It gets misunderstood. We talk about high insulin level in the blood instead of insulin resistance, because insulin resistance is sort of a construct it doesn't really make sense, because you can take away insulin resistance by lowering the insulin. So it's not like there's someone inside. So, there are a couple of metaphors, like trying to shove people into the Japanese trains and the subway. Apparently they hire people to push people in, and that's like trying to get more sugar in the cell, and those people pushing in. If you get rid of the people pushing the people in, that's really not what's going on. We're talking about high insulin levels because of carbs being consumed, that now you have that together, and it can all be reversed. So, and the other thing that insulin resistance did is, some years ago, it focused on the intracellular processes. So there must be something wrong in that cell that makes it resistant. God forbid it's the food and the insulin out on the outside of the door. I mean, in the blood, because that wasn't. No, it has to be something in that cell. So the scientists focused on, there's a problem getting the fat into the mitochondria. So it's a fat burning problem inside the cell without regard to the insulin outside. So, it's a fat problem. The body's not burning fat because insulin is telling it not to burn fat. So the forest has been lost for these little desire to find the mechanism, and then, of course, the perfect drug that you can use that mechanism to fix things. When this was all worked out 150 years ago in the first diet book that we know in the Western world, the Banting diet in London, England. And so what I teach was actually used for obesity and diabetes treatment before insulin was ever measured. Before glucose was measured in the blood, it was only measured in the urine. And now, again, the saying is that if you can't fix something, you study it in ever greater detail. So we know all these different things inside the cell and all these drugs, but, just stop eating the carbs. It works so well, but you can see this, the focus. In fact, one of I heard kind of real bad black humor, really. It was someone going to the governmental agency saying, look at all the money I can save and all the people getting better at treating diabetes. And the governmental person said, well, how are our drug stocks going to do? So the powers that be want the money to be flowing, and they would rather have, in the short run, the pharmaceutical sales be high and have people suffer, I guess, and even then the doctors in my area, very difficult to get them out of a drug treatment model. And food's really, good food is really my secret weapon. And I'll say that sometimes if someone's has no idea what I do, and explain that, we can get you off medicine by fixing the food. Don't mention all the other really important things for long-term health, stress management, exercise, social life, but it's a great place to start, and I have a lot of fun. So I enjoy helping people reverse problems, get to live life better, and the kind of clinical practice I had before of a standard internal medicine doctor really was kind of depressing. We didn't really fix much. We gave more medicine. Still today, we give medicine and people just didn't get better because I didn't focus on the food. Why would you, right? Well, now I know that it's really, really important. In fact, I hope there's some school where the president or the dean or I don't know if it would be a medical school, an osteopathic school, a diet, nutrition, where the dean gets up and says, what you put in your mouth matters, and then leaves, and everything should be taught as a result of this. That, it occurred to me at the gas station recently, I couldn't get bad gas. I tried to find gas with, processed food so we treat our cars better and then you walk inside and there's all this junk food and terrible stuff to put in our human bodies that, anyway, what you eat matters. Of course, when you're young, you can get away with murder. And, so as you get older, you may want to pay attention. But as the theme that you brought up, that these things start a lot earlier than any symptom or even blood test may show. So the common sense of just, eating things that look like food is a good idea. I mean, eating food, not fake foods and all these other things, even though they're tantalizingly good. I acknowledge that. But again, that's the insulin. And yet you can't measure that. So we measure the glucose and I wish there would be a way to teach this through the traditional methods, but now it's the, YouTube University. You can learn this actually.
Coming back to that theme of people having insulin resistance for a number of years and then not knowing it, it gets me thinking about the fact that for some people at least, probably the majority, and you could elaborate on that, they do tend to get overweight and obese as their metabolic health degrades and they become insulin resistant. But why is it for a group of people, they maintain a quote unquote healthy weight, but yet their metabolism is suffering underneath?
Yeah, the mechanism isn't well known. I mean, you could just kind of put it into the category of genetics. You're just given that metabolism, but certainly there's some people who develop metabolic issues at different weights than other people, handling carbs differently. The construct that has been helpful for me is just thinking of it called the personal fat threshold, where if you are someone who makes fat from that extra sugar really well, so your liver is cranking out the sugar goes into fat in the liver and in the fat cells, and the fat from the liver is being sent out to the cells, and you're processing the sugar and making insulin from that, then you're not going to develop high blood sugar or diabetes. But if you're someone who has trouble making that conversion of all that sugar into fat, and that's another theme I'm trying to figure out how to teach better, is that sugar turns to fat. I mean, just look. I mean, if you've been eating a portion of your daily calories is carbs, but we store fat, that carb has to be turned to fat. You're not storing extra carbs. Carbs as a storage form in our body is really very limited. So if you're not able to make that fat from that sugar, then it gets kind of slogs around in the blood, and that's called diabetes. Some experts even kind of argue that or rationalize that growing obese, being able to turn that extra sugar and carbs, because starches get digested to sugar, it's all carbs. If you're able to make fat really well, it's protective from getting that elevated blood glucose, or protective of getting diabetes. Now that's kind of the arguing teleologically, but there is that phenomenon of some people develop diabetes at younger ages and lower weights. And, as a general kind of, if you're Asian, you tend to develop diabetes earlier, Indian and Asian. If you're Caucasian, you tend to, at earlier weights, you're able to make more fat before you start getting diabetic. But that personal fat threshold kind of explains why there are differences in some people get the metabolic problem of diabetes and others don't.
And you could probably make the argument too. You mentioned getting diabetes, getting overweight as a protective mechanism. I would also add to that too, that showing that sign that you are gaining weight and you're becoming obese could be a clue that could be helpful for people knowing they have a metabolic problem versus the person who's skinny and goes on for years and years thinking they're healthy, but doesn't have that sign to show them what's going on.
As the last 10, 15 years, what I observe is that there's a tolerance of higher weights than happened in my age or when I was growing up. And there's a balance. I mean, it's terrible to have fat shaming. It's awful, and it can really destroy children's lives. On the other hand, there's a kind of a pushback of, for example, if you lived in Europe, in some countries, the social pressure to be skinny is so strong. I mean, there still is a lot of fat shaming and all that. But if there's an acceptance, when someone's growing up, I just remember a young woman in her 20s who she really didn't have any idea that she was overweight, because all of the other people that she was growing up with were also overweight. And it was a shock when diabetes showed up. But actually, so the tolerance and awareness and acceptance has a double-edged sword. But if at the same time, there's research that the scientist claims is being suppressed, where she actually looks at data sets and finds that you want to be a little bit heavy for long-term longevity. You don't want to be super skinny. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, but the powers that be don't want that information be published. And she claimed even that there was censorship of that. So I don't know that anyone knows the ideal weight. And it's a balance of, are you able to do what you want to do? Are you happy? Are you? But there's some people who are such a gradual thing. I guess like when the frog, the temperature in the water goes up really slowly, it doesn't have an awareness of it. That you might have shortness of breath, and you think you don't know why it is, and it may be because of the weight, and you might not have really been told that it was a medical issue. It's an interesting time that way, and it's a tough discussion to have with some people, because I come at it from a health standpoint, not an image. If someone came in loving cigarettes, and I'd say, well, look, it's killing you. We got it. So everyone accepts that. Someone comes in loving bread, and I say, well, yeah, but or recently it was a woman from Africa and rice. I can't give up rice. I'm African. I was like, well, no, it's okay. We'll talk about other options to have, or at least minimize the amount. But a lot of talking about food and nutrition in social cultures, and a lot of people take it quite personally, when all I'm trying to do is teach how our body works.
And part of the story too, say this person here with the rice, they may have to give it up initially when we're in that 20 grams of carbs phase, the first phase, but there's also 2 other phases in the book. And if people get metabolically healthy, maybe they could move on to phase 2 or phase 3, where there is more relaxation in the realm of carbs. So it might just be a temporary thing to get your health back, and then you can pivot.
Exactly. And that usually unfolds, as I start teaching a little bit about what I want someone to do. You mean I'll never be able to have rice ever again? No, we're not going to lock you up in a prison and never let you have carbs or rice. But if you go back to the way you were eating that got you here, it's just a matter of time until you get back to where you are metabolically. And weight is just one example or one consequence of that metabolism. And yeah, it's confusing because not everyone has the same metabolism, even within the same family, and it's kind of classic that the joke is, did you hear about the woman who went on the keto diet? Yeah, and her husband lost 20 pounds. because it seems to work faster initially for men than women, but in the long run, it still works. It's just the giving up rice for that 6 months seems insurmountable, or for however long someone needs to do it. But knowing that it's a temporary thing, and then, but getting someone to just try it for a day, I'll often negotiate for the 20-gram phase 1 approach. Negotiate just one day because the hunger goes down so much. But you have a little bit of oatmeal or grits or toast or a smoothie in the morning, and poof, you're not a fat burner anymore. That insulin goes up, turns off the fat burning.
So when we're in that first phase, the 20 grams of carbs, we're going to be in ketosis with that amount of carbs. And as we go to phase 2 and phase 3, I think that becomes questionable. What I'm getting at here is how big of a therapeutic benefit are people getting from ketosis, or is that just a side effect of having the carbs low and keeping the insulin down?
Well, there's a phenomenon of, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Our bodies burn what we feed it, for fuel. So the gas metaphor of putting gas in a car is easy. I mean, it's just gas and it's a car. Well, what we eat can be loosely categorized as carbs and fat as the fuel sources, and protein really doesn't get used much for energy. So you can be a carb burner or a fat burner. If you want to lose fat mass off your body, lose weight, reverse diabetes, you want to keep the carbs super low, be a fat burner. When you get it to 10, 20% of your diet is carbs, you're basically going to burn 10 to 20% in your body as carbs. So the amount you burn matches the amount you eat. And so if you're no longer trying to lose your fat mass, you can increase the carbs because you're not trying to burn fat inside. You can burn carbs as well. So the extent to which someone's in ketosis, you can measure it yourself, breath, blood, or urine. But in general, the 20 grams or less, everyone's in ketosis. 50 grams or less, maybe 50% or less are in ketosis. 70 grams per day total, not net, pretty much nobody's in ketosis. And I'm watching the science develop in terms of ketones being good and healthy and anti-inflammatory, but I'm not going to sign off yet, like with the confidence of a prescription drug, that it's you have to be in ketosis the rest of your life because you'll be healthier. I don't think we understand the nutrition and the effects that well yet. I am comfortable to say, with monitoring, sure, I think it's okay if you never eat carbs again, which makes me even kind of passively tolerant of the whole carnivore craze going on, because if you do it right, you're getting all the nutrition you need and you're not getting many carbs at all. But and the health benefits sometimes they're unbelievable. I mean, going from bedridden to normal, so I think the carb level, you have to think of, you got to burn those carbs. And if you're going to eat more of them, that just means you're not going to be burning fat off your body. You can get to an equilibrium where you don't have measurable ketones over and beyond what a higher carb eater might have. But then, even then, the ketone level in the blood doesn't tell you how much ketone you're burning. So, it's like a level at a dam. The dam level can be held constant, even though you have water coming in the top and out of the bottom. So even measuring ketones is fraught with the idea that it doesn't tell you the flux. The flux is the term of how much is coming in and then how much is coming out, kind of the throughput of it. But I personally don't measure ketones and have not made changes to make sure I'm in ketosis all the time. I do know some scientists that have made that kind of commitment. And even at a recent conference, I asked a panel of experts if they measured their own ketones and if they asked their patients to, and there was a range. One of the doctors said, well, this is a lifestyle for me. Whenever I check, I know I'm in ketosis, so she doesn't have to check. And then another person said, well, yeah, I monitor and check, but not for ketones. I check my blood glucose. And glucose is a marker. If the glucose is low, you're not eating many carbs, and your ketones are probably going to be a little higher. And then two of the panelists didn't measure ketones at all in themselves anymore. So I think you'll find a range. There's always early adopters in any kind of new thing, and there are those who are obsessing of their ketone levels, and I don't do that again. But my introduction to this field again was 20 years ago, when you couldn't monitor all of these things, and maybe I got comfortable without doing it, and maybe personality-wise, I'm just not someone who needs to know.
As somebody who's been in this world for such a period of time, you mentioned not checking your ketone levels, but are you somebody that sticks to a certain phase of your diet? Are you a stage 1 guy, stage 2? Talk about how that's evolved as well over the years.
Yeah, well, so I'm personally, I'm a scientist. So I got into this actually traveling to visit other doctors who had worked it out, learning how to do a clinical trial as a method to look at nutrition scientifically like it were a drug. So we got that, assembled the information from Dr. Atkins, Dr. Eads, Dr. Bernstein, Dr. Rosedale, came up with clinical research to basically validate what they were saying. And I learned how to do a low-carb diet over 20 years ago to learn kind of how do I coach? How do I tell people? So I learned eat in the outside of the grocery store, go to zero carb items as a rule, and all those kinds of things. And I never had a large weight journey. So maybe 20 pounds personally. Never had diabetes. And so metabolically I can handle carbs, but it's just easier for me to not eat carbs. I mean, I just don't have to worry about the weight, the scale, and so what I'll do is I'll go, I'd say 99% of the time I don't eat many carbs at all. But if I'm, with friends and socializing, I go on a low carb cruise with people. I may have some more carbs, and I kind of think of it like, would you ever go out and have a cigar with your buddies if you're out, golfing or playing poker or something? If you're, well, every now and then. That's kind of the way I think of carbs now, is that it's not the healthiest thing to do, but it's a social way. It's certainly a way that I learned, and even today, I don't know what happened this Valentine's Day. I had a couple of these candy hearts. And, if you ask, I had one heart, well, that really meant one bag. I mean, I can't stop. And that I grew up with Halloween candy, with mounds of it. And really, I'm like most people, a partial carb sugar addict. And I just have learned to stay away from that stuff, or if I have it, don't have it very long. But the other thing is I drink alcohol, kind of the old school, and also having grown up in Wisconsin, which I think is a kind of an alcoholic producing state, perhaps. Well, a lot of the European influence there, and reading research about having wine or resveratrol of course, that's with carb eaters. All those studies are among carb eaters. That is part of my lifestyle, and from some personal health issues, I haven't been able to exercise much. So I've learned that if I can't exercise for a period of time, I'd cut the carbs down. If I am going to exercise a little more, I can be a little more liberal with the carb, have a little more carbs. But to me, it's just easier to stick to zero carb things, or to have not much of the super high carb items. But I know, a quarter cup of berries is going to be 5 carbs. So, a teaspoon of sugar is 5 carbs. An alcoholic drink, whether it's beer, wine, hard liquor, is going to be 5 carbs. So there's also sort of if I'm going to have a yogurt that has 5 carbs, a little piece of fruit at the bottom, I just don't do that much in one day. But I think there are a lot of ways to do it, a lot of ways to be healthy. And the common theme, it seems to me, is keeping the glucose and insulin low. And you can do that, as a meatitarian, or as a omnivore, or as a vegetarian. It's just you want to avoid things that make the glucose and insulin domain go up.
Well, let's stick on that carnivore piece. This is a diet that's gaining a lot of momentum, at least in my circle, it seems to be. And we know that your phase 1 is 20 grams of carbs or less. If that's good, why not go all the way to carnivore and have no carbs? Would that be better, or is there certain things we lose when we go down to that? Talk about your thoughts on that, or is that up and coming, something you're going to start testing and see if it's even better? Are the carbs in there just so people adhere to the diet? A lot at you there, but I'm just curious on how you feel about all that.
Yeah, well, again, from my vantage point, I need a certain level of not just observational research or people's experiences. I need some papers and having it vetted through the scientific method, and that we don't have that for carnivore-like diets. You can talk about populations who ate a certain way. When I think of what I teach, it's almost carnivore. I mean, it's carnivore-like. Like I joke because there was this paper recently that said keto-like. And what does that mean? It has no meaning really. So, the vegetables, I know I was an author on the new Atkins for a New You with Steve Finney and Jeff Volek. This was 2010. So, 13 years ago. And the idea at the time was that to get mainstream acceptance of something from a dietitian group, of course, they changed to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. The old American Dietetic Association is now AND, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. To get them to even kind of say, well, okay, maybe you had to have some vegetables. That's 2010. So it was like we wrote this book by consensus and had help, but we kind of drove the book. And in the fine print, it says, you never really have to eat carbs, but it's just in the fine print. So the Atkins company, which drove the book and the policy about it, wanted to be sure they were checking the boxes of the mainstream. So now, as time goes on, I asked a carnivore proponent, Amber O'Hearn, to come up with a scholarly piece on whether a carnivore diet could give you all of the micronutrients that you need. And it's good. I mean, I'm not worried about a human eating micronutrients and getting everything from non-vegetable sources. And even then, I am worried about a human getting micronutrients from only vegetable sources. I mean, and then if you're going to be a vegan, you got to be watching out for vitamin B12, like a hawk. So I have less concern as a doctor who's dealing with some people don't know anything about nutrition and diet. Some people don't want to spend any time worrying about this, coming up with practical answers. Being just carnivore for some people makes it very simple. I mean, all I have to do is eat meat. And if you throw in eggs, so that's chicken and fish and maybe even, or some versions of carnivore are very strict. And, a wolf doesn't have coffee, so they can't have coffee. I mean, so there are all these different versions that I think are reasonable if you're following how you are. Someone came in, and this is just, again, being in a clinic, someone came in losing way too much weight. So there was no awareness of that individual. So if you're not able to kind of see your, and I kind of remember, I don't really look under my neck much, I live in my head for a long time. So if you don't really have an awareness of your own body, you want someone else to kind of give you a judgment or help you with that, someone trained in it. So I think carnivore has done by most of the reputable sources out there, I think it's reasonable, and the tremendous kind of unbelievable stories. In fact, one of them, one person wrote a book about her experience. It was one of my patients, and I read about it. I read about her in someone else's book, and I said, "Oh my gosh, that's Rebecca! That I knew her." and so her story is that she was diagnosed with eating disorders, and she was skinny. I mean, I remember she looked like, she was just really anorectic because she couldn't eat because it hurt. It hurt to eat, and everyone kind of assumed that was some sort of eating disorder like anorexia, and it wasn't. And it turned out that she had to figure out this on her own path of finding other people just eating meat. And so Michelle Hearn wrote the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, which is basically she fixed herself by doing the absolute opposite of what she was taught as a dietitian. And then Rebecca Farmer wrote this book about her experience, basically reversing these things that I couldn't fix. I mean, we have no name for a problem where you can't eat vegetables so that it makes your stomach hurt. I mean, we call it an eating disorder because you ended up too skinny. And so a lot of these things are not medical. They don't fall into the medical world. And if you're feeling well, if you're not getting too skinny, and that, you could do that by a weight on a scale, a BMI, a friend, looking at you, and or a health practitioner helping you figure that out, and you don't force fasting. That's the other thing that's kind of weird, where I don't mind if you don't eat if you're not hungry, but I don't want you to ignore hunger signals. So I don't like the idea of forcing yourself to only eat once a day when you're hungry the rest of the day. So fasting has kind of gotten which version of it. And then eating those vegetables, I think, well, when you look at the list that we have of non-starchy vegetables, it excludes a lot of the ones that other people are sensitive to. That's fascinating. And certainly the gluten is gone on a program like we teach, the sugars, the FODMAPs. The FODMAP diet is a no simple sugar diet. Well, what I teach is also a FODMAP diet. It's basically an elimination diet of all of the artificial sweeteners, artificial flavorings and colorings that you might see in processed foods, that I think some people are sensitive to that. And finally, what we do is we tell people to have salt if you crave salt. And there are people who can fix themselves just by adding salt. And that's a theme in the migraineur treatment, that you can actually reverse and prevent migraines by just changing the food. So I know this goes along. When you fix the metabolism, you fix everything in the body. In fact, it becomes to that statement, it's so unbelievable, you won't believe me. And yet I can't withhold information from people to, at least give it a try. Finally, the heartburn, it's almost 100%. It's gone. And we don't get any credit for that, and that's probably one of after the statin medicines, these heartburn medicines are so commonly prescribed. Again, you don't need to have those, but a lot of ways to be healthy. I think carnivore is I would like to see clinical trials so I can straddle the world of here's some science behind it. I'm told that's in the works, but I haven't seen that data yet.
One of the concerns I'm sure a lot of people that would come up for them as we start talking about cutting carbs down to 20 grams a day or taking that even further to the carnivore diet would be lack of fiber for the microbiome. And these days in the health world, there's so much talk around the microbiome and feeding that and the health benefits. How do you think about that?
Amy Berger, who wrote the End Your Carb Confusion with me, I made her be a co-author, not a ghost writer. We would joke about it. Not the microbiome again. Such a distraction. So I think the physical manifestation of a complicated, busy, colorful microbiome is heartburn, irritable bowel syndrome, and all of the other things that doctors treat with drugs. The beauty of the microbiome change on a low-carb diet is that the number of bacteria decrease, the amount of bacteria decrease. It calms things down. In fact, there was a world expert microbiome research showed a slide click of tropical rainforest, basically saying this is a healthy microbiome. And I'm like, there are things that they're dangerous things in a rainforest. I mean, snakes and all, and I think it was click a microbiome on a low carb diet is like this desert, and I'm like, wow, that seems calm. I could meditate there. And I knew I was going to southwest US after this was a conference in Geneva. And so I thought, okay, when I'm in Tucson, I'm going to ask, is the desert beautiful? There was a scientist that said there's nothing in that desert. And they go, yes, the desert, beautiful. It's got flowers and the beauty of the sun. So I think the calm nature of a low-carb microbiome is what I see every day. And it takes away the gurgles and the pain and the heartburn, and you don't need drugs to treat it. So that's like, and the fiber thing, fiber is just a way to sell products. These are association studies of, you have high fiber and all these good things. When that was finally turned around into a clinical trial for colon cancer prevention, which is one of the big reasons people talk about fiber, it didn't reduce the colon polyps or colon cancer by giving people more fiber. So that's another criteria that with associations, you really need to turn it into a prospective clinical trial, ideally just manipulating one factor. And fiber is really, really overrated. And you don't need to eat fiber.
This sort of ties into fiber because this is going even more extreme along that continuum where we talked about 20 grams of carbs, carnivore, fasting's come up a couple times. And I want to go there. This is something, again, like carnivore that has a lot of steam right now. And my thought is, if we know that at the root of why your diet's working for people, it's bringing the insulin down, we go carnivore, we're going to bring that down even more. We start intermittent fasting, we're going to bring that down even more. Why wouldn't we use that as an adjunct with your diet to tighten up that eating window, to keep the insulin low for a longer period of time? And to me, there's just so many upsides where the fact that you're having to think about food less and you get a cognitive boost. At least I've experienced that when I'm fasting, and the benefits go on and on. So I'm just curious why that's not something you advocate for.
Well, again, I'm waiting for clinical trial research that looks at in a controlled way. So if you just follow people without a control group, you're not going to really have a great. It's not proof that it was really that what you did is what the effect people saw. Often you can see what you want to see. But I think the new basic science and theory about autophagy, so your body basically cleaning itself up when you aren't adding in outside food, and eating is a stress, that you're able to clean itself up is not yet translated into clinical research to know if it's additive to just keeping the carbs low. So that's my kind of perspective. I have a certain idea of what can happen when people don't eat many carbs. And I teach eat when you're hungry, but if you're not hungry, you don't have to eat. So some people just kind of automatically do intermittent fasting, eat one meal a day, or thereabouts. So they're just naturally cutting out that and getting that time window. Others seem to need to eat more frequently. And if I told people they had to intermittent fast, I would lose those people. So there's a difference in the clinical population giving a flexible approach than finding what works for you. So if you're not hungry, I don't think you have to eat much. But at the other extreme, if you're not aware of when you're eating too little that you're not performing, your body is eating its own lean muscle mass, that's going too far. So you want to be measuring as you go. It seems to me you want to eat as little as you need to help you do whatever you want. And that there's a wide range of doing that. So I think intermittent fasting in some cases is fine. Although the NIH group that studies intermittent fasting gives people carbs once a day. I'm like, okay, in the context of a low-carb diet, intermittent fasting is fine. But I don't like the idea of you struggling all day to not eat, which is a stress, and then eating carbs once a day. You're turning off the fat burning and going into the carb burning mode. And of course, at the end of the day, if you kept the calories under what under what you were burning, you're going to be losing fat off your body. Of course, the equation doesn't line up perfectly. We know sugar calories have different hormonal effects than fat and protein calories, but the calories do matter. I mean, so you could eat. There was a program in Durham called the rice diet, where you ate rice, fruit, and fish. It was almost all carbs, just a little bit of protein. They got in trouble from the diet police because they didn't have enough protein to get up to the guidelines. But people lost a lot of weight because it was about 800 calories per day. And for just about everyone, that's going to mean you draw upon your body fat. But then there were books written about how people came to the rice diet in Durham and then they ate off plan at the Domino's Pizza once a week to, just kind of flagrantly cheat on the program. I mean, so it was kind of a social thing to do at the time. But there is no rice diet program anymore in Durham. There is. I always like to mention, if you're struggling so much that you would say, you need to lock me up. Or, there are voluntary places, including one in Durham, where they won't lock you up, but you can voluntarily come stay on the premises, learn to eat in a lower carb, lower calorie way. Those places do exist, but they're not inexpensive.
Let's talk more about the calorie piece. You quickly mentioned there the hormonal aspect, and classically, you talk about this in your book. People are told when they want to lose weight, cut down on calories and move the body more. So for people that are coming to this conversation and that's their current paradigm, let's talk about calories and the nuances within that realm.
Yeah, so outside the body, a calorie is a calorie. You put a all carb sugar bomb, you find out the calories by burning it, basically, and calories are a measure of heat. And then you have protein, for example. Let's say you have the same calories, and that put a whole expert research generation of scientists kind of to turn off their minds about what caused obesity. They said, well, we know it causes obesity. It's calories, too many calories. But inside the body, the hormonal effects of these foods are very different. As we've talked all this whole time, the glucose. So if you ate a bag of Skittles, all sugar, a candy food, your blood sugar will go up and insulin will go up. It'll stop the fat burning, and the sugar will be turned to fat if in the context of that day you've had more energy in than you need for the day. Whereas if you had a piece of steak, the same calorie level outside the body, it doesn't raise the blood sugar, it doesn't stop the fat burning. So the metabolic effects are very different. And the confusion comes in, and there were some doctors who wrote books like Calories Don't Matter. And the idea was to get people off of the calorie counting thing, because if you eat lots of carbs and you just reduce calories, you're going to be hungry. And that doesn't work to lose weight while you're hungry. So as a weight loss doctor, we know the fundamental thing we need to do is cut hunger out if we're going to have long-term success. You can do that by diet, by medicine. So calories are, yes, it's, Gary Taubes is investigative journalist who wrote several books, very influential for me, Taubes, Taubes. Gary wrote a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories that showed the weak science of the low-fat diet. And it was very helpful for me to come to grips with why is this so different and why do my colleagues think a certain way? It's because the science wasn't very good, and yet it got perpetuated. Well, Gary was talking once about the calorie issue and says, well, let's imagine we're outside a restaurant and you ask me, why is the restaurant crowded? And I say, because more people went in than came out. And you're like, well, yeah, of course, but is it good food? And I say, no, the reason it's crowded is more people went in than came out. And, is it good food? Is it good service? So basically the scientists in the obesity world shut off their minds to that idea. Well, people get obese because more calories went in than came out. But why? I couldn't watch the same researchers, same scientists at the meetings I was going to, because it's like anything that came out of these people's mouths was tainted with the idea that they already knew what this solution was, is more calories went in than came out. When practically speaking, I was giving people the Atkins diet, the idea that you eat more fat and, well, that was more calories, and they never even studied it and said it was bad and harmful and bad for you because of that idea that we solved obesity. We solved the idea of the restaurant being crowded. More people went in than came out. What are you, stupid? It was like Gary ruined me because I couldn't go to meetings anymore without, well, this is what's supposed to happen when you learn new things and you see old things in a new light. So to count calories, yes, calories matter at the end of the day. The Excel spreadsheet summary of calories that went in have to be less than what you're expending for the day. So if you're not exercising, let's say you're in a wheelchair even because of joint pains, you have to reduce the amount you're eating if you're going to call upon your body to use its own fat to give energy up. But even got to the extreme that David Ludwig, who's a pediatric endocrinologist at Harvard, decided to do a consensus article with the calories in, calories out people, the CICO, and the carbohydrate insulin model people, the CIMers. And there's a joint paper that basically says, both are right, and can't we just all agree to disagree on a few things? And in there, the term he doesn't use the restaurant of going in and out. He uses the term tautology. Of course, that's classic Dr. Ludwig. Tautology just means it's true. So yeah, if you're obese, more calories went in than came out. Yeah, if the restaurant's full, yeah, more people went in than came out, but it doesn't help you understand why. So then I wondered how he was going to address that, and he said, it's a tautology. It's not very helpful to say that obesity is from more calories.
So we know your diet works. Coming back to phase 1 being 20 grams of carbs a day, total carbs. How do you feel about layering in if people are, feeling like they want quicker results or they want to even regulate their blood sugar to a greater extent? How do you feel about people layering in things like berberine, cinnamon, apple cider vinegar, using different quote unquote hacks to regulate blood glucose and then indirectly regulate the insulin?
Well, I've certainly seen people try lots of things. And if there's little harm or little potential harm and it's not, inordinately expensive, I'm passively allowing of those things. Although, I'm not going to have a policy to say you need to use something until we have either clinical trial with control group or placebo ideally, or to have enough of my own patients doing something to kind of say, okay, I've seen this a while, and there seems to be a little harm. I don't know. I know apple cider vinegar can cut the hunger out, and I've seen that to the extreme of someone not eating at all. And so there's also this apples and oranges thing. If a study of apple cider vinegar is done with people who eat carbs, it may have a very different effect than among my patients who don't eat carbs. And I'm worried that things might become too strong if the appetite suppressant effect of a keto diet becomes super strong and people don't eat at all with apple cider vinegar. That's a downside that you're not going to see in those clinical trials. And, there are people who argue about, these studies that are done going back and forth as proof of, and no, these are just kind of looks at how some people respond. Weight loss is, if you're going to try to lose fat weight off your body, it is a matter of the amount you eat. So if someone comes in and they're losing 1 pound a week, I usually see 1 to 2 pounds per week, and they want to lose weight more faster. They have a wedding coming up, a swimsuit to get into. I'll explain, well, you lose weight by eating less, not more. And it's fascinating, the mindset, but you mean I don't have to have breakfast? No, not if you're not hungry. And I don't say, I told you that. But no, I never say that. I just calmly repeat the same messages over and over. And if you functionally can eat less and feel, like you're satisfied and you want to lose more weight, and you're focusing on getting protein as your major, so that's the meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish and eggs, I think it's fine. So you can even add in, you mentioned other supplements, but you could actually add in conscious caloric reduction within limit. I mean, I think the medicines now we're seeing some of them do 3 to 5 pounds of weight loss per week. And that's just a little fast. Until we have more clinical data, we're worried about muscle mass loss. We know that if someone goes for metabolic weight loss surgery and they're losing 50 pounds a month, they're losing muscle mass. That's pretty well documented, and we don't want that. So there are healthier ways to lose weight than other ways, and we think 1 to 2 pounds per week is a good, when you're not measuring the muscle mass directly, a good rule of thumb. And I guess I'm passively tolerant of people adding in things. Although if someone comes in with a dozen supplements, this happens, and they line them up on. I'll just kind of go, well, I don't think you need any of those. Sometimes the eyes light up, and that's going to save me a lot of money. Or we count out that there's 1 gram of carb, a gram of sugar in each item, and they're taking 20 of these. There's your 20 carbs right there. So sometimes that's the hidden carb that people aren't taking into account. But the reason I stay pretty strict is that it seems corrective for a lot of the things that are happening today. And probably as a final, spoiler alert, the nuts can get you into trouble. And we don't allow nuts at first. And what? No nuts? See, I know that if it has that kind of tug of, well, I couldn't give it, then that's a possible problem. In my experience, half the people have a problem with nuts at the beginning. And that's just too many. If I did a program that only worked half the time, not enough people would come back. That said, when this doesn't work, it's because people aren't doing it and they can't wrap their head around it. So, not everyone who comes to learn what I teach have success because they're not doing it. If you put people on a research board and you have people follow this method, it works for everyone. It's kind of like the pill works if people take it. That's kind of obvious, right?
When you say people can expect to lose 1 pound or 2 a week, is that following the phase 1 of the plan?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the best experience I have. When you think of translating in different science, the low glycemic diets that are out there that aren't as low in the carbs have less outcome, lower weight loss per week, per month, per 6 months. And in a program like mine, you have to have a certain amount of success or people won't come back. They're voting with their feet. If they don't get results, they're not going to come back. That said, you don't have to have 100% success. Enough people will come back. And the higher you go on the carbs, I think you're going to get a little less potency, a little less weight loss effect. Although if there's no time crunch and you wanted to try 50 gram or less in a total, not net, and it's real foods, what do you have to lose? I mean, if it's not working in a couple weeks, move on to something else. And that's kind of my general principle. When I just can't believe some people are following their experts' advice for a year and having no success. I'm like, if you're doing something that doesn't work after 2 weeks, try something new, bail out. And then everyone's going to gradually come to low carb. If these other approaches aren't working in 2 weeks, because this works, within 2 days. So I use 2 weeks kind of as the, because I see some people even gaining weight under their dietitian or doctor recommendations, and we can't tolerate that in a clinic where people come to me for weight loss.
Earlier, we talked about the fact that insulin resistance is usually tied to weight gain, but we know it can be independent. What I'm getting at here is we know the number of 1 to 2 pounds a week we can expect to lose on the diet. How long does it take for insulin resistance to start to fix itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of variability. So I think insulin resistance can, in some people, resolve almost overnight. And that's evidenced in the reduction of medications needed, of the way people feel, the hunger being gone. And then I guess at the other extreme, I might have someone who's lost 100 pounds in a year, but they have another 100 pounds to go, and they still have higher blood sugar levels because that extra 100 pounds is still causing some insulin resistance. So it's really a phenomenon of watching the individual variation and measuring things. I don't really have great statistics as what percent, how long. That's a great question, and it could be figured out by using glucose and insulin or triglyceride HDL levels, and blood sugar level is one factor, but it's not all of them.
Up until this point, we've been talking about the diet as a static entity where we're sticking to that 20 grams of carbs per day. How do you feel about carb cycling, where that is the baseline, but then somebody on weekends allows for more carbohydrates to come in, and then say during the week they go back to that 20 grams a day?
Well, metabolically, if you think about it, you're just going to burn those carbs and shut off the fat burning for that period of time. So it'll slow down the process. On the other hand, if it makes it more tolerable, that you're able to, if it's 5 to 2, 5 days on and then 2 off, and you're going forward and back, but you're making progress. Metabolically, it makes no sense. Once you're in fat burning, I don't understand why adding carbs metabolically would be a good thing, and yet there are people who do it and read a book about it and then claim it works for everyone else. And so you got to be careful about that. But the other issue that weight is not all weight is fat weight. There's water weight that confuses people. And so when you do something and then the weight changes, well, is it that you're less puffy and you have no leg swelling? So is it a water weight change, or really is it the fat weight? I think you can kind of talk yourself into things living day to day that aren't the whole picture. I think there's some factors that are at play, kind of like long-term medicines might be there for a longer period of time. You're not going to see the effect just day to day. I don't know. So I guess if it's working and you're not a carb addict, so I deal with a lot of people. Maybe I don't know, 25% of my patients are sugar and processed food addicts. Even self-aware about it, and I would not tell an alcoholic to drink on the weekends and just abstain during the week. So if you're at that level, and I've learned a lot from Dr. Vera Tarman, who's a physician in Toronto. She wrote a book called Food Junkies, has a podcast called Food Junkies. And if you're that level of carb addict, then you're not going to want to go back to have carbs on the weekend. I mean, it's just inevitably going to be every day then. That's the hazard of carb cycling, is that you may just go back to it. Some people even argue that the non-sugar sweeteners have the problem that it just keeps you in that sweet, having an idea of something sweet, then eventually you're going to go back to sugar. I haven't found that to be universal. I mean, definitely. I don't even think it's that common, but it's a potential issue with carb cycling or perpetuating the sweet taste, if you will.
Talk more about that addictive aspect of carbs, because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like fats and protein don't have that. Talk about, when it comes to carbs, how that's happening on a physiological level.
Well, there was a day devoted to sugar and processed food addiction at the latest Metabolic Health Symposium for Metabolic Health in Boca Raton. The Nicole Avena has done some animal studies, pretty elegant work, that show in these animals that the dopamine receptors and the reward center of the brain gets lit up when the animals have sugar, so that sugar is as addictive, even more addictive than some substances because of this dopamine reward center. It's the same place where tobacco, nicotine lights up, same place where cocaine lights up the reward. And so that's what you want over and over again. And then generally you need more and more to have the same effect. The clinical body of knowledge about sugar and processed food addiction now has led to 2 textbooks on sugar addiction, one written by Joan Ifland, Ifland, and often you can kind of wait, well, has that gotten to the level of a textbook yet? Yes, it has. There are 2 of them. And then the clinical use of a low-carb or keto diet, there were 2 talks, one by Dr. Tarman in Toronto. The other was by Dr. Unwin, David Unwin, and Jen Unwin, who are physicians in the UK. And they teach a lot about sugar addiction and limiting sugar and how many teaspoons of sugar are in all the different foods. And therapeutically, so there's the basic science of the dopamine, and therapeutically, if you use the same ideas and concepts of addiction medicine, now, don't use tobacco or cocaine or heroin, you put in sugar, processed food, you can develop treatments and behavioral therapies that will help a lot of people. And that the total abstinence idea, of course, is one of the first things that you'll run into. And that's helped a lot of my patients to come to grips with that. And, why do I keep relapsing? And there's a section in Food Junkies where this is why you keep relapsing with any substance of abuse. And then, one day, if you follow this long enough and you really don't want to be struggling, you wake up and you say, okay, I'm just, all the forces come together and say, okay, I'm going to stay away from sugar. It might even be this week or this month. And then it doesn't hold the same pull on you anymore. It's like this monkey on your back, and you get rid of it for a while. You don't crave it. You don't need it. Of course, the grocery stores, you have all of these sugars, candy bars, and all lined up right as you exit. And, if there's a line, it means they're right in front of you, and you have to just, not pick them up like maybe you used to. So, but I think the total abstinence from the substance of abuse can be very useful if you find yourself kind of just relapsing back, especially if you're in your 50s and 60s and you grew up with miles or mounds of sugar at Halloween, and I remember having a candy cigarette to be like my parents because they were smoking and I couldn't smoke, so all of these. In fact, I used to steal money out of my mother's purse to go get sugar. These are all signs of childhood or addiction, or I was just a thief. I don't know.
I noticed when you're navigating through that section talking about addiction, you're using the word sugar instead of carbohydrates, which gets me thinking, do you put carbohydrates in that same category as sugar?
Yeah, I do.
And when you're talking about carbs and sugar together in a general sense,
it could be bread.
Okay. But what about even less processed? When we talk, okay, rice is a better example, but what about moving into fruit? Like, do you think about that sugar the same in an addiction sense and beyond as the processed white stuff?
Absolutely. Fruit is a big culprit. And yet after a couple of days, you don't miss it. It's pretty amazing. If you get rid of all of the things that raise that dopamine. And so so when I talk sugar, I'm really meaning all carbs, because the carbs get digested to sugar. And that's the translation of all of this, which especially if you're an addict, you want to say, well, you're just talking about that refined sugar. No. And then of course fructose is not really found by itself in nature. It's in sugar. It's sucrose. So really glucose and fructose make sucrose. So when I'm clinically, I just say sugar or carbs. So thank you for that, because there'll be people who say to me, well, I don't want sugar. I'm not a sugar addict. I like bread. And they can't give up the bread, and I'm like, no, that's sugar too. Or there was one person who came back and I never told her not to have sweet tea, and it didn't occur to her in her brain that sweet tea had sugar in it. So, but it was anyway. There are ways that teaching and implementing a program can get thwarted by your knowledge of a certain set of foods and your habits and behaviors. And it's kind of an interesting challenge, but boils down to 20 grams or less, total, not net, state of the foods on that page. It works for a lot of people. It's very helpful.
And you talk about, I guess you could call this a hack in the book, carb backloading. And I would say this is something more advanced for people once they get, used to cutting their carbs down as a whole, but this can be another strategy people can layer on down the line, and I'll have you talk about why that could be advantageous.
Well, so now explain to me what was the carb backloading?
So carb backloading, the way I understand it from your book, is you're still having the same total amount of carbs in the day, but you're pushing those back further in the day, which is going to change your 24-hour physiology when it comes to insulin and how the metabolism is reacting with the food in the body.
Yeah, so the timing and of when you have it, that's a phenomenon that a lot of people will talk about. I can't find you a clinical trial that talks about that, but it does make sense, especially if you find that just eating makes you want to eat more. And if food were like a gas tank and eating, then we're full, then you would think that if you ate something, you would eat less later. There's some people who just having breakfast and having some carbs too in the morning can actually make you more hungry throughout the day. And so dropping breakfast or eating the carbs later in the day will make that easier for you, actually. So that's a lot of the mindset change that happens if you're not losing as fast as, if you're trying to lose weight, you're not losing as fast as you think, then work on these behavioral mindset things like, I have to eat 3 meals a day with, no, you don't. If you're not hungry, you don't eat. If you're in front of the refrigerator and you find yourself just opening the fridge and, one thing is if you're not hungry enough that you would go out and chase down a rabbit and spear it, then, you're not hungry or some other kind of construct to reduce the amount of time and effort it takes for you to get the food. It's become so quick. And putting carbs later in the day, the backloading idea is very useful.
Up until this point, we've talked about this diet from the approach of being therapeutic for people. And it sounds like that's the people that are coming in to see you, who I'm sure generally have weight they want to lose and they want to feel better. And they probably have a lot of different chronic health issues. Putting that out front, my question for you is, do you feel like this diet is the proper human diet, or is it just good now for people that have, quote unquote, ruined their metabolism having too many carbs throughout a lifetime? So if somebody were to come into this world and have a moderate amount of carbs and then come and see you when they're 30, 35, would they need to go to this, or is it just for people that have broken their metabolism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think those who are smarter than I, the people who've looked at history and the evolution of things, the hunter-gatherer, paleo, primal, ancestral way of eating certainly was one without many carbs. That's pretty clear. Now, you could argue, well, maybe it doesn't mean it's better just because it happened that way. The introduction of carbs happened relatively recently, and there's really very few controlled or even observational studies of following people who haven't had carbs and have had carbs to a great degree. So we don't have clinical trial studies. It would be a shame if you had to wait until someone had a metabolic problem to change something. You want to be able to prevent this. I think that's the new frontier for research, and that is to, let's assume we don't know the answer. Let's take some kids, take some young adults, randomize them, follow them. Some eat carbs, unlimited, if you will. Others don't. We restrict it to see how they do. The common element, though, is it seems to me kind of logical and common sense and theoretically correct to limit sugar. And we don't need clinical trials to limit sugar. Of course, you could have argued that, well, doctor, you're telling everyone to lower the fats. And we didn't have clinical trial evidence back then to do the low-fat diet. But the signal is so strong. I think so let's say half, actually I think Jeff Volek, last I talked to him, said about a third of Americans do fine eating carbs. And it seems like they can live long, healthy lives. Of course, which carbs, I don't know. Seems to me the people who become diabetic and go to weight loss surgery are the ones who have a huge carb intake. And they might even be the sugaraholics. They end up getting the diabetes and they can't control it, so they get weight loss surgery. But I think measuring the glucose and insulin early that would be a way to do a fairly quick study among really any age. And from my vantage point, the healthful signal is that this would be preventive of all of these different problems for 2/3 of Americans. So it's not like you're gambling on only helping 1% here and there. It's a large element. Now that gets us back to the proper human diet. Did you know that children are born into this world in ketosis? They're actually, babies are born without eating carbs, and they have ketones. Now, the measurement of that, it's fascinating. No one really measures ketones these days. They measure sugar, glucose, and then they worry about the babies having enough sugar. And that element of, after 2 days, you become a fat burner. Everybody does. It's not just you and me or based on religious belief. We store fat on our bodies. And so that's why we burn it if we don't eat anything. That is kind of the logic that it's leading me kind of late in the game. I mean, I've been in this world 20 years. Maybe this is the default way to eat, that we store fat, not sugar. And you want to limit the amount of sugar to some degree, and in 2/3 of Americans, maybe to a large degree. But, it's hard for me as an academic to say, yes, this is the best, because I would really love to have a controlled trial of this versus another way of eating. And everything looks better when you compare it to the standard American diet. That's not a very good approach. But measuring the glucose, the insulin, the other sort of metabolic parameters that a doctor typically measures, that all looks good. And you might even have some ketones. That's okay. Your doctor might freak out, but you may have some ketones. That's okay. That's normal. And then there's a company now that's allowing you to get your own blood tests done without a doctor order, and without them even getting access to it. So we're getting a peek into thousands of people who are getting their blood done. It's called ownyourlabs.com, and you say what kind of diet you're following. In fact, I'm looking forward to some data presented about this. We have a hunch that, of course, ketones are going to be higher in those who don't eat carbs. And I think LDL is going to be a little higher in those who don't eat carbs. And maybe even the A1C might be a little higher. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's like a new normal range that is going to be created, so you don't have to worry about comparing yourself to those who eat carbs.
Well, as we come to a close here, I'm going to come back to a disclaimer you gave early on, and that's for people that are on medications that are going to attempt to make some of these changes we talked about here today. This is simple, powerful, and you've been doing this, you mentioned 20 years, you've been doing this for a long time, and it works for people. So people that are going to take this on, you're going to radically change your metabolism quickly. And if you're on medications, you want to be working with a doctor, because those are likely going to need to be modified as you fix your metabolism. So I want to come back to that and end on that, because again, it seems so simple, but it is so powerful, and it's going to change so many people, the trajectory of their weight and their health. And which brings me to thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. This is very powerful information, and your book is incredible. We're going to link that up in the show notes. We're going to link up your social media, your website. Thank you for coming on the show.
Great. My pleasure. And we're trying to get the word out through adaptyourlifeacademy.com. I like to borrow from other scientists, other researchers. Rob Lustig, who's a physician in San Francisco, came up with a line that's very useful. It's good food is medicine. Bad food requires medicine. And so I like the way it diplomatically ties together what doctors are doing, they're treating the bad food with medicine, but we can even do better by using good food as medicine.
Good way to end it. Thank you, Eric, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Now that you're done with my conversation with Eric, you're going to want to stick around here and catch my chat with Ken. He's got a lot more to share about the low-carb diet and using it as a weight loss tool. I'll see you over there.
I know that you've tried. I know that you've really put in the effort, but you were given the wrong information. If you want good health,